If this story kept you engaged and you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the upcoming episodes and new stories. There are many more videos waiting for you. Feel free to explore them right after this one. And if this video touched you or inspired you in any way, share it with others. Your support helps the channel grow and brings more stories to life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. The airplane hummed with the familiar, comforting vibration that lulled many passengers into quiet conversations, naps, or idle scrolling on their phones. Sunlight filtered softly through the windows, washing the cabin in a warm glow that made everything feel safe and predictable. For most of the students traveling together, this flight was just another step on the way to the university competition they had been preparing for months. They had joked at the terminal, taken photos of each other holding backpacks and instruments, and promised to celebrate properly once they arrived. No one imagined that this ordinary day would shatter into something none of them were ready for. They were a close-knit group, bound by months of training, shared meals, and late-night study sessions. Ethan, calm and steady, naturally slipped into a leadership role without anyone asking him to. Beside him sat Lucas, the joker of the group, who seemed incapable of staying serious for longer than a minute. Across the aisle, Maya hugged her jacket tightly. She never liked flying and had confessed earlier that she couldn't relax until both feet were back on solid ground. Others were scattered around the cabin, laughing, chatting, and settling into the flight with the comfortable ease of people who trusted the world around them. As the plane leveled out, the sky outside appeared smooth and endless, a pale canvas of soft clouds. A few passengers dozed off as the engines droned steadily. A flight attendant smiled while collecting empty cups. The routine nature of the moment almost made it impossible to believe anything could go wrong. For a while, it truly felt like nothing would. Then, almost too subtly to notice at first, the light outside dimmed. The sky shifted from bright to muted gray as thicker clouds formed around them. The aircraft trembled lightly, just a small shiver that caused drinks to ripple in their cups. A few passengers exchanged glances, the kind that said, "It's probably nothing, right?" Moments later, a soft chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the captain's voice instructing everyone to fasten their seatbelts due to expected turbulence. It was spoken calmly, almost casually, yet there was something in the tone, an undertone of alertness, that made even the most relaxed students sit up straighter. The trembling grew stronger. The plane dipped slightly, then steadied, prompting a nervous laugh from Lucas, who joked that the plane must be dancing. But his attempt at humor fell flat when another jolt hit, harder this time, making a few passengers gasp as overhead bins rattled. Maya grabbed the armrests, her knuckles turning white. Ethan leaned toward her, reassuring her in a low voice, though even he felt his heart picking up pace. Outside, the clouds thickened into a swirling mass, blotting out the sky and stealing the remaining sunlight. The turbulence intensified quickly, almost abruptly. The aircraft lurched to the side, then shook as if trying to wrestle itself free from an invisible grip. Loose items slid across tray tables, and several people cried out in alarm. A loud metallic groan echoed through the cabin, the kind that didn't feel like part of any normal flight. The oxygen of the moment seemed to thin as fear settled into everyone's chests. In the midst of the chaos, the aircraft began losing altitude. The descent was noticeable and frighteningly fast, accompanied by the relentless roar of engines straining against the wind. Passengers peered out the windows, eyes widening as they saw the outlines of jagged mountains emerging through the clouds far too close for comfort. The realization that the storm had pushed them into dangerous terrain spread through the cabin in a cold, heavy wave. Another violent jolt forced the plane downward, and alarms blared from the cockpit. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, more strained this time, telling everyone to brace for impact. Panic erupted, but it was helpless. Instinctive panic, the kind that makes people reach out blindly, grab hands, murmur prayers, cry for help. Ethan gripped the seat back in front of him and shouted at the others in his group to brace, his voice shaking, but loud enough to cut through the noise. He felt Lucas latch onto his shoulder, Maya burying her face in her arms as she curled forward. The descent became a blur of noise, shaking, flashes of white snow, and the metallic scream of the aircraft trying to hold itself together. Then the world exploded in a jarring impact. The plane slammed against the ground, skidding violently across a slope of thick snow. Everything became chaotic, motion seats jolting, bodies thrust forward, snow blasting through cracks in the fuselage. The aircraft tilted sharply, then ground itself to a halt with a final, shuddering groan. For several seconds, nothing moved. The silence that followed was deep and unnatural, broken only by the faint hiss of wind slipping through gaps in the torn metal. Ethan lifted his head slowly, disoriented. The world around him was dim, lit by the pale light seeping through broken windows. A few overhead lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows along the cabin walls. His ears rang and his limbs trembled. But he was conscious. He took a shaky breath, then another, trying to anchor himself. A part of him couldn't believe the crash had ended, that he was still alive. All around him people were stirring, soft groans, ragged breaths, whispered names. A woman sobbed quietly, clutching her seat. Someone called for help from the back of the cabin. A bag lay torn open on the floor, its contents scattered like confetti. Snow drifted in through a large crack in the fuselage, melting upon contact with warm skin and leaving cold trails. Ethan forced himself to check his arms and legs. They hurt, but he could move them. Lucas beside him blinked dazedly, then muttered something about the world still spinning. Maya was crying quietly, but when Ethan touched her shoulder, she nodded to show she was not severely hurt. Relief settled into him, but it was thin and trembling. There were many others to worry about. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, though his legs shook under him. He began calling out to the others, moving slowly down the aisle, helping anyone who struggled with their buckles or needed support. Many students were battered and in shock, but alive. Whatever miracle had occurred during the landing, it had spared far more people than anyone might have expected. As people regained their senses, their gazes turned instinctively toward the windows. Outside lay a vast stretch of white and endless blanket of snow, interrupted by sharp, towering peaks. The airplane had come to rest in a remote mountain valley, cradled between ridges that looked impossibly high and unforgiving. The sky above was a dull, oppressive gray, with wind sweeping fine snow into swirling patterns. There were no signs of civilization, no lights, no trails, no roads, nothing but wilderness. Maya reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Ethan checked his own device and saw the same. Even if the storm had cleared, they were trapped in a place too isolated for normal communication. Panic threatened to rise in his chest again, but he forced it down. They needed calm, structure, direction. Standing still and spiraling into fear would only make things worse. He gathered everyone he could still speak to and reminded them that the first hours after an accident were the most critical. They needed warmth, shelter, and a plan. With the plane partly intact, the fuselage could serve as temporary refuge. Carefully, the group began to move outside, helping each other down from the damaged steps. The cold hit them immediately, a sharp, biting cold that sliced through clothing and froze exposed skin. But they had no choice. They needed supplies from the baggage area and the scattered debris around the crash site. They searched the wreckage methodically, collecting blankets, coats, food containers, medical kits, and anything else that could help. Lucas managed to pry open a storage compartment to retrieve several useful items. Ethan organized a central pile where everything could be sorted and shared, making sure no one hoarded supplies. Several students worked together to drag parts of the shattered fuselage into place, creating a makeshift barrier against the wind. Inside the airplane's broken shell, they arranged seats to form a semicircle where people could rest. They placed the injured closer to the more sheltered area, distributing blankets among them. Even in shock, the group showed remarkable cooperation, as if their shared fear had bonded them into a single, determined unit. No one dared think too far ahead. The crash was too recent, the situation too surreal. They only focused on surviving the next few hours. As daylight faded, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind howled outside the torn metal walls, slipping through the narrow cuts. People huddled close, sharing body heat, whispering quietly to keep fear at bay. The night stretched long and uneasy. Some managed to sleep in brief, trembling intervals. Others stared at the dark ceiling, replaying the crash again and again, wondering how many seconds separated life from death. Ethan remained awake for a long time, listening to the soft breaths of the group and the distant moan of the wind. He knew they had survived something extraordinary, but now they faced a different kind of danger, one that required endurance, patience, and unity. The mountains surrounding them felt impossibly large, as if sealing them off from the rest of the world. Yet somewhere beyond those ridges, help existed. They simply had to hold on long enough for it to find them. When the first faint light of early dawn seeped through the cracks, it revealed a cabin full of exhausted but living faces. The new day didn't erase the danger, but it brought clarity. The realization settled over them all. Survival depended not on luck anymore, but on their choices. And though they didn't know it yet, the next decisions they made would shape everything that followed. The storm had passed, but the real struggle was only beginning. The morning light crept slowly across the shattered interior of the fuselage, softening the harshness of twisted metal and snow-coated floors. For a few heartbeats, the world inside the broken aircraft seemed suspended between fear and renewed resolve. The night had been long, restless, and colder than anyone could have imagined, but dawn brought with it a fragile sense of clarity. The students stirred one by one, their bodies stiff from sleeping in awkward positions, and their minds clouded with exhaustion. Yet each breath they drew signaled one undeniable fact: they had survived another night. Ethan pushed himself upright, rubbing the numbness from his fingers as he took in the quiet scene around him. People huddled under blankets, some still sleeping, others staring blankly at the gray light filtering through the cracks. Maya was awake already, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes thoughtful rather than frightened. When she noticed Ethan looking at her, she managed a tired but genuine smile, a small sign, but one that felt like warmth in a place where warmth barely existed. Outside, the wind had eased since the previous evening. The sky remained a muted silver, but at least the storm clouds had dispersed. In the stillness that followed, the mountains loomed even larger, ancient and indifferent to the fragile human lives scattered within their shadows. Lucas stumbled toward the exit, muttering that he'd never complain about dorm room heating again. His joke earned a weak laugh from someone deeper in the cabin, a sound that felt out of place and strangely comforting. They all knew that simply enduring the crash wasn't enough. Survival required effort, organization, and above all, a purpose. As people woke, Ethan gently gathered them for a brief discussion. No real meeting, just a shared acknowledgement that they needed structure if they wanted to make it through the day. It wasn't heroism, it was instinct. Even those who barely knew him seemed willing to follow his guidance, simply because he carried himself like someone who refused to let fear win. Their first step was understanding what remained intact. The crash had torn open part of the airplane, but several compartments in the tail section were still accessible. If they were lucky, there might be equipment or emergency supplies they could use. Lucas offered to help search, claiming he needed something productive to distract himself from thinking too much. Maya joined them as well, and together they carefully maneuvered across the snow-covered ground, their breaths forming pale clouds in the cold morning air. The tail of the aircraft lay partially separated from the main fuselage, half buried in snow. Twisted metal framed the jagged opening where the body had split, but inside several panels remained undisturbed. They stepped cautiously, testing each surface before shifting their weight. The cold metal groaned under their boots, but it held. Inside, debris from storage compartments littered the space, yet among the broken pieces, Ethan's eye caught a familiar shape. The housing of a radio system. It was damaged but not destroyed. He called to Lucas, who climbed toward him with surprising agility despite the slippery footing. Lucas examined the equipment with an intensity that belied his usual carefree attitude. "I don't know if I can fix it," he admitted, "but I can try." And trying beats sitting and shivering. Maya passed him a flashlight from the supplies they had rescued earlier, holding it steady as Lucas inspected wires and circuit boards with the seriousness of someone approaching a lifeline. Back in the main cabin, the others were becoming more active. A few ventured outside to assess the area, staying within sight of the plane. Footprints marked their movements in the freshly laid snow, but the surrounding valley stretched untouched in every direction. Nothing stirred beyond their small cluster of survivors. Not a bird, not a distant figure, Not even the slightest sign of civilization. It was a stunning beauty, but also a chilling reminder of just how entirely alone they were. When Ethan, Lucas, and Maya returned, they carried the damaged radio with them. Even though it was fragile, it represented possibility. The group gathered as Lucas laid it gently across a pair of seats and began working. The cold numbed his fingers, and he blew on them repeatedly before continuing, refusing to give in to discomfort. At first, his efforts seemed futile. A spark here, a flicker there, but nothing that resembled a working device. Still, small signs of life were enough to raise spirits. If a few lights could turn on, maybe a signal could be restored as well. The atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. People offered suggestions, shared tools, and helped steady the radio when Lucas needed more hands. It became an unexpected focal point, proof that they could still shape their fate. Even though the radio remained stubbornly silent, the group clung to hope. They were learning in real time that progress didn't always come in grand leaps. Sometimes it came in small, stubborn attempts to make broken things work again. By midday, they knew they needed more than technical effort. They needed water. Food could wait. Though they had only a limited supply, hunger was manageable for now. Thirst, however, would become dangerous quickly. Ethan suggested organizing a scouting group to explore the valley. It would require caution, but staying close to the crash site wouldn't magically provide answers. A few volunteers stepped forward, among them Noah, Claire, and a quiet student named Ava. They bundled themselves in whatever extra layers they had and set off, promising to return within a few hours. The group watched them disappear into the white landscape, their figures swallowed by the towering peaks. Those who remained did their best to strengthen the makeshift shelter. They repositioned seats, lined the interior walls with blankets, and patched gaps where the wind threatened to pierce through. The work was slow, but the busyness helped steady their minds. Fear took root most deeply in idle moments, so they pushed themselves to stay active. Time passed without much conversation. Some tended to the injured, checking wounds and sharing comforting words. Others sat near Lucas, offering silent companionship as he coaxed the radio into semblance of function. The wind outside whispered softly, sending fine crystals of snow swirling through the air. Every hour that passed reminded them of how far from safety they truly were, but it also strengthened their determination. When the scouting party finally returned, their faces flushed from exertion and cold, they brought news that sparked an immediate wave of relief. They had found water, not much, but enough to sustain them. A narrow stream sheltered beneath a crust of ice ran along the base of the valley wall. The water was cold, nearly freezing, but it was clean. Ethan felt a heavy weight lift from his chest. Access to water meant time. Time meant more chances to be found or to find a way out. Organizing water collection became a new priority. They assigned rotating teams to gather it, ensuring that no one traveled alone and that no one became too exhausted. They improvised containers from rescued items, metal cups, thermoses, even sturdy pieces of plastic from storage bins. The walk to the stream was slow and laborious, the snow deep and uneven beneath their boots, but every trip brought back another small victory. Meanwhile, Lucas continued his careful work on the radio. Hours passed as he adjusted wires, tapped gently at panels, and cleaned frost from components. Ethan stayed close, offering help where he could, but mostly providing quiet support. At last, just as the pale afternoon light began to fade, Lucas twisted a connection, and the radio emitted a faint, crackling buzz. The sound was thin, fragile, but unmistakably real. People rushed closer, crowding around as if witnessing a miracle. The crackle came and went, fluttering weakly like the first heartbeat after long silence. It wasn't a working signal, but it was proof they were close. Lucas exhaled a breath that fogged in the cold air and grinned with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Even the faintest hum of life in the device reminded them that hope was not an abstract concept. It was something they could reach with their own hands. As dust settled again over the valley, the survivors gathered around the makeshift fire they had managed to spark earlier, using reflective metal panels and sunlight. The flame was small and flickering, but it fought bravely against the cold. People extended their hands toward it, savoring every bit of warmth. Conversations drifted between them, memories of home, dreams for the future, simple gratitude for the company of others. They were strangers only days before, but crisis had a strange way of binding souls together. Some shared stories of their families, describing holiday traditions or favorite meals. Others recounted lighter memories from campus life, football games, late-night study sessions, cafeteria disasters that were somehow hilarious in hindsight. These fragments of normal life became small lanterns in the darkness, illuminating their spirits more effectively than any fire. Even Maya, who had been tightly wound with fear since the flight began, found herself laughing softly at one of Lucas's stories. The sound surprised her, but it warmed her too. Ethan observed them quietly, feeling a profound mixture of pride and worry. They had endured so much already, and yet their kindness persisted. They looked out for each other, shared supplies willingly, and never let anyone struggle alone. This unity would carry them through the days ahead, because he knew deep down that their ordeal was far from over. As the fire dimmed, they prepared for another cold night. Blankets were rearranged, stronger barriers were added to the walls, and hot water obtained from melted snow was passed around to warm hands. People curled together for warmth, settling into a weary calm. The wind outside had softened to a low whisper, but the mountains still towered over them like silent guardians, reminding them of the vast unknown they were trapped within. Ethan lay awake longer than most, his thoughts sifting through every detail they had learned that day. The damaged radio, the stream, the valley's shape, each piece formed part of a larger puzzle. Their chances of survival had improved, but only marginally. They needed more than supplies. They needed a plan to escape the valley itself, especially if rescue teams didn't arrive soon. The stars glimmered faintly through the cracks in the fuselage, distant and cold. Yet they were there, unchanging and steady. Ethan closed his eyes, letting that steadiness anchor him. The day had been exhausting, but they had accomplished much. They had water. They had an almost working radio. They had each other. Tomorrow they would continue building on that. With that final thought, he drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that the next morning would present them with a choice that would change everything once more. Morning broke in the mountains with an unsettling quiet that settled over the survivors like a new kind of weight. It wasn't the oppressive silence of fear, nor the eerie calm after a storm. It was something different, an expectant pause, as if the world was holding its breath for whatever would happen next. The air was sharp, colder than the day before, but clear. Sunlight spilled across the snow-draped valley, turning the ground into a shimmering expanse that looked almost peaceful, despite the harsh reality it concealed. Ethan woke with a sense of unease pressing against his ribs. He lay still for a few moments, listening to the soft breathing of those around him. The makeshift shelter inside the wrecked fuselage had improved slightly during the previous days, but the cold still found its way through every crack. People had slept close together again, forming small clusters for warmth. Maya was curled up near the edge of the row of seats, her face resting on her arm. Lucas lay on his back nearby, his breath rising in tiny clouds. Despite the exhaustion on their faces, they were alive. Somehow they had managed to endure again. But Ethan knew the fragile victory wouldn't last. The radio had given faint signs of life, but still couldn't transmit. The water supply was accessible but required regular trips through the deep snow. Their food was dwindling, and while rationing helped prolong it, the reality of hunger had already begun to settle into their bodies. Most importantly, there was still no sign of rescue. If anyone had been searching for them, the mountains had kept that effort hidden behind their vast, impassable peaks. When he finally sat up, stretching stiff muscles, he saw that others were stirring as well. Noah was already by the entrance, peering outside toward the snow-covered slopes. Claire was helping one of the more injured passengers adjust a blanket. Even in their fatigue, everyone moved with purpose. Hope hadn't been extinguished, but it needed direction. Ethan stepped outside into the crisp air, forcing himself to breathe deeply as the cold bit at his skin. The valley looked unchanged, quiet, immense, and unforgiving. But something in him had shifted. He could feel the pressure of time ticking down, urging him toward a decision he hadn't been ready to make before. The group couldn't simply wait any longer. If the world was searching for them, then the search might take days, even weeks, assuming anyone knew where they were. Staying here, hoping for a miracle, was no longer enough. The decision formed in his mind with slow, reluctant clarity. Some of them needed to leave the valley and look for help. When he returned inside, he found Lucas already awake, rubbing his temples as though warding off a lingering headache. He looked up as Ethan approached and read the expression instantly. "You've been thinking," Lucas said quietly. "Never a good sign." Ethan gave him a tired half-smile. "We can't stay here and hope anymore. We've done everything we can with the radio. We found water, but if we wait for rescue where we are, we might run out of time." Lucas nodded slowly. He didn't argue, though the weight of the realization settled over him visibly. "I figured you'd come to that conclusion," he said. "I just hoped we'd get a signal working first." "So did I," Ethan admitted, "but I don't think we have that luxury anymore." They gathered everyone who could stand and sit up comfortably, forming a loose circle around the fire they had coaxed into life again. Ethan explained the situation carefully. No panic, no embellishment, just the simple truth. They needed to send out a small team to climb the valley's ridge and follow any sign of a path, road, or structure. Even one person out there might reach help faster than rescue could reach them. The group reacted with a mix of fear, confusion, and acceptance. Maya's face tightened with anxiety, but she didn't speak against the plan. Noah volunteered immediately, offering his strength and endurance. Ava hesitated, but eventually echoed him. Lucas exchanged a look with Ethan and sighed. "Guess it has to be me and you then," he said. But Ethan shook his head. "I'm staying," Ethan said. "If something happens while the team is gone, someone needs to lead here. Someone needs to keep the group together. You're one of the strongest climbers we have, and you've got the stamina for it." Lucas frowned. "I'm not doing this because of stamina. I'm doing this because I trust you to handle the chaos here, but that's exactly why you should be the one to go." Ethan shook his head again, firm but gentle. "No, I need to stay, and they need someone out there who can move fast. That's you, no arguments." Lucas stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled shakily and nodded. Maya stood then, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I want to go too." Her words carried a mix of conviction and fear, but Ethan stepped forward quickly, shaking his head. "No, we need people here. People who can help care for the injured, gather water, keep morale up. This isn't an easy climb, and you've said yourself how much the cold affects you. You'd risk too much." Maya looked down, gripping her sleeves tightly, but she didn't argue. She understood, even though it hurt to admit it. After further discussion, the final team was chosen. Lucas, Noah, and Ava. 3 strong, capable individuals who could move quickly and cover ground before nightfall forced them to stop. They began gathering supplies, what little food they could spare, extra layers, makeshift walking sticks carved from broken seat supports, and a torn scrap of reflective metal that could be used to signal from afar. Watching them prepare stirred an ache inside the group, a blend of fear for those leaving and fear for themselves. A journey into the mountains meant facing unknown dangers, hidden crevices, sudden weather changes, the sheer physical toll of climbing through snow at high elevations. But staying behind meant enduring uncertainty and helplessness. The moment of departure came sooner than anyone wanted. The sun had risen far enough to light the valley without warming it. The cold hung over everything with a stubborn persistence. The 3 chosen climbers stood near the opening of the fuselage, wrapped in every layer they could find. Breath fogged around their faces as they took one last look around at the small community that had formed in this desolate place. Maya hugged Lucas tightly, whispering something that only he could hear. Claire squeezed Ava's hand, offering strength. Ethan stepped forward last, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "When you reach the ridge," he said slowly, "don't stop. Look for any sign of people, a path, a building, anything, and stick together no matter what." Lucas nodded. "We'll come back," he promised, "with help." And with that, they began their climb. The group watched in silence as the 3 figures ventured across the white valley, their steps carving narrow trails through the snow. Each stride looked heavy, requiring effort that seemed disproportionate to the distance they had traveled. but they pressed on. Their silhouettes grew smaller with every minute, swallowed gradually by the vast expanse until they appeared little more than moving specks. Inside the aircraft, the remaining survivors worked to keep busy. They organized supplies, checked injuries, and kept the fire alive. The shared grief of waiting fused with determination. Every action, no matter how small, was performed with a sense of purpose. They had come to understand deeply that survival was not a passive state, but a continuous effort. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its highest point, casting light across the peaks but offering no warmth. Ethan made several trips to the valley stream with others, carrying water back carefully. Each time he looked up at the ridge, he scanned for any sign of movement, but the distance was too great. The mountains hid the ascent from view. He could only hope the team had made progress. As the day wore on, the group shared stories again, not as a distraction, but as a way of holding on to the kind of humanity that felt so distant from their current circumstances. They spoke of home, of plans, of memories that kept their spirits grounded. The fire crackled softly, giving life to the cavernous interior of the fuselage. Just before dusk, when the sky began turning shades of lavender and deep blue, Ethan stepped outside one last time to look toward the ridge. At first he saw nothing, only the expanse of snow in the darkening sky. But then in the distance, where the ridge curved like a jagged crest, he spotted something, a faint glimmer, a flicker of reflected light. It appeared only for a moment, then disappeared behind a slope. His breath caught. It was the reflective metal signal they had given Lucas. A surge of hope coursed through him as he shouted for the others to come outside. People scrambled to the opening, squinting toward the mountain. The light flickered again, faint but unmistakable. Maya clasped her hands against her chest, a mix of relief and adrenaline surging through her. The group erupted in murmurs, some crying out softly in joy. "They made it," Claire whispered. "They found something," Noah's brother added, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded, blinking away the moisture in his eyes. "They're trying to show us they're close to something, but we don't know what." They watched until the last light faded and the flicker disappeared for good. Night fell quickly, and the cold urged them back inside. But the mood had shifted. The despair that had begun creeping into their hearts now retreated beneath a fragile but steady sense of optimism. The night was long, but this time, people slept with a little more ease. Hope was no longer an abstract idea. It was a real glimmer on a distant ridge. When dawn broke again, Ethan woke with a renewed purpose. There was work to do, preparations to make, and a possibility, no matter how faint, that rescue was now within reach. The hours passed slowly, each moment drawn out by anticipation. The group remained alert, taking turns watching the ridge. The morning stretched into afternoon. Finally, late in the day, a sound echoed across the valley, a shout carried by the mountains, faint but unmistakably human. People rushed outside, searching the slopes desperately. And then they saw them. 3 figures descending the far side of the valley wall, stumbling but determined. As they came closer, the exhaustion in their movements told the story before they even spoke. When they finally reached the base of the slope, Lucas collapsed into Ethan's arms, panting, shaking, but smiling. "We found a path," he said between breaths. "An old one. And beyond it, people. A small settlement. We found help." The group burst into a mixture of cheers, sobs, and laughter. Those who had kept fear buried deep finally allowed themselves to feel joy. The cold didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. Relief washed over them all like a warm wave. In the hours that followed, the survivors began packing what little they had. With the guidance of the returning team, they made the journey toward the mountain path the next morning. The climb was slow and agonizing, especially for those weakened by injury or hunger. But the promise of rescue pulled them forward with unshakable resolve. The path led them across narrow ridges and steep slopes until, at last, they reached the settlement Lucas had described. A small cluster of homes nestled among the mountains, smoke rising from chimneys, figures rushing toward them with blankets and shouts of astonished relief. The villagers wasted no time helping them inside, offering warm drinks, food, and comfort. Within hours, emergency services were contacted. A rescue operation was mobilized. For the first time since the crash, The survivors were surrounded by the kind of safety they had almost forgotten existed. Later, as they sat wrapped in blankets, sipping steaming cups of broth, someone asked Lucas what kept them going during the climb. He glanced at Ethan, then at the others, their tired faces illuminated by firelight, their eyes filled with gratitude and resilience. "We had each other," he said simply, "and we never gave up. Not once." In the days that followed, the survivors returned to civilization, each carrying with them a story of endurance that would shape the rest of their lives. They had faced the unforgiving power of nature, the weight of uncertainty, and the raw fear of isolation. But they had also discovered something deeper, the strength that emerges when people stand together, refusing to abandon hope even in the bleakest of circumstances. The mountains had challenged them, tested them, nearly broken them. Yet in the end, they walked away not as victims of fate, but as proof of what human spirit can withstand when unity and determination become lifelines. Their journey had been long, perilous, and unforgettable, but above all, it had been shared, and that made every step forward possible. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes and all the upcoming content. Make sure to check out the other videos on the channel as well. There's plenty more waiting for you. And if this video moved you, inspired you, or kept you on the edge of your seat, feel free to share it with friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.